Hello, welcome to Evangelistic Apologetics. This is an introduction to systematic Christian worldview. Today we are continuing our study of the second part, the theory of creation. Our general theme is that in the first part of the series, we gave you the standard of truth. And now in this part, we are giving you the theory of creation to measure it by the standard of truth, to see whether it matches with facts and with logic. And of course, with faith is not an issue here. We're trying to deal with the widest possible audience. And now we have given you two ways of reading the Bible. One is the literal way. It gives the young earth creation. One is the less than literal way, and it gives you a long time and old age. And the reason for the second way is because of people hearing that science have given facts or incontrovertible evidences that the earth was old and history was old and older than even the age of creation of the earth. And we have found out the core of this, the secular point of view is three time scales. And there is an astronomical time scale, which expands the biblical creation week into billions of years, roughly the age of the universe. And secondly, it was the geological time scale, which expands the biblical year of the Great Flood into billions of years, roughly the age of the earth. And we found that both of them were based on a series of assumptions. And therefore, the basic concept, the assumption of these time scales are not necessary. And today we are dealing with the third popularly assumed secular time scale. It's called the archaeological time scale. And this one, when I was in seminary, I took a class of biblical archaeology. And I was given a set of tables, a data of memorizing when each age or archaeological age corresponds in time. And I had a question, because I've learned some apologetics, I had a question of how did they know this time, And it's always intellectually honest to ask, how do you know? Give me some reason that I can believe this. And, well, I wasn't given. It's just that it's popularly assumed. Just memorize it if you want to be scholarly. If you want to publish paper accepted by the scholarly circle, you have to memorize and go according to this. And it always left questioning me. So I began to search for the reasons of why it was assumed so. And I found out that the archaeological time scale starts from the three-age system. And it was proposed by a Danish archaeologist named C.J. Thomson in the year of 1836. He believed that you need to measure the time, the relative scale of time at his time, by the means of production of the people. So he divided into history into Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age. And later people, of course, subdivided them into the old Stone Age and the Neolithic. Lithic means stone. And then there's a so-called Chalcolithic. It's kind of a bronze and Chalcolithic. How do you spell it? Chalco. Okay, Chalcolithic. And then we have the early, middle, and and later Bronze Age, and we have the Iron Age 1 and 2, and so on, so on. And so this becomes the basic thinking system of modern archaeology, and many people just mesh this with the theory of evolution. And generally, the age that the date it was assigned to was trying to match with the theory of evolution. But of course, when we question its intellectual foundation, we got to see how universal is this system. Okay, and according to the Bible, there is a time scale. It starts from creation, there's a great flood, and then there's a Tower of Babel. There's a time of about 2 millennium, actually 1656 years, between the creation and the flood. And there's just about 250 years between the flood and the Babel. And from Babel began all nations. And we can find out in Mesopotamia, their historical records discovered through archaeology, and can go to securely to about 2000 BC, and even a little bit beyond that. And but no more than the flood. And in China now we have a continuous history, and we have many matches with the with astronomy, which is really the foundation of ancient chronology. And Mesopotamia in China had all the archaeological matches, and China can go to about securely to the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, and it can extend to, it has record from about 2000 BC. So now the official date of the first dynasty of China began from about 2070 BC, so roughly 2000 BC. Okay, and India, its solid date starts later, let's say about 1st millennium, but it extends to about the beginning of 2nd millennium. In Greece and Rome, it starts even later. The solid date is from the middle of the 1st millennium, but extends to about the 2nd millennium. Only in Egypt, and that it goes beyond that. At first it went to longer, and then it's been shortened recently. Now the official date, or the collective opinion of the scholars, is around the beginning of the 2nd millennium. So only there it's earlier than the 2nd millennium. And don't you see there's a mismatch? Everything else starts from about the time of Tower of Babel. Only Egypt goes longer. That tells you that Egyptian chronology has a problem. It assumes linear relationship of all the dynasties, while if they are parallel, then all the dates would collapse. Okay, and so the archaeology, or the modern archaeological time scale, is basically taking this short period between the flood and Babel, or maybe even just a short period of Babel. I think it's an overnight event when God confused people's language, then people scattered into 70 nations, and then began all the nations of the earth. There are 70 names in Genesis 10 after the Tower of Babel. So basically, the circa 250 years, and the archaeological time scale has extended to about 10,000 years or more. So that is another time scale that extends a short biblical time to a long scale. Well, actually, it's a scale. You can just measure it in that, but it's actually no longer than that biblical time scale, if you believe the biblical one. So anyway, we can see that this whole archaeological time scale is based on a 3-age system of measuring time based on the means of material production. However, we have issues with this. We know that this method does not apply to sub-Saharan Africa. in Africa, sub-Saharan means south of the desert of Sahara. It never had bronze. So how about in the Americas? North and South America. Well, I'm not spelling it right, but you just accepted some of the Americas. North and South Americas, it never had iron. So how do you use the 3-age system when two of them are never there? And plus there is the issue of the date. Even in Eurasia, in the Europe and Asia, in the big continent, this absolute date of these ages are different. In China, the Iron Age is roughly 1,000 years later than that in the Middle East. So we did have the 3 ages. We can say that there are Stone Age, civilizations. There are Bronze Age civilizations. There are Iron Age civilizations. But our Iron Age is roughly 1,000 years later than that of the Middle East. So you can say that, this may seem to be roughly okay system, but it has limitations. Okay, it can only be used in basically the ancient Near East. And everywhere else, if it's in Eurasia, you have to delay the date. If it's in other continents, they may not apply at all. Okay, so we can see that using this 3-age system to determine the date is a rough draft. It's not absolute. Okay, and now, how do we use that in the ancient Near East? Okay, we'll add it Americas. Now China, late date. Okay, so that's the limitations. Okay, it can only be used in the ancient Near East, ANE. Okay, but even in ANE, in ancient Near East, when you do archaeology, what you do is you dig on their hills. In ancient Near East, people live on the hills. Okay, and because the cities are easier to be defended on the hills, it's hard to attack it. And also the fertile field are in the valleys. So here are for planting, and the hills are for living. Okay? And that has been universally so in the Middle East, especially in the Levant, which means from Syria all the way to Israel in that biblical archaeology's field. Okay, and when sometime people attack the city and burn it, and then you will have a layer of destruction. And later people build it again, and then you have another layer of destruction. Actually, the lower the layer is, the earlier, the old and new. Okay, so the earlier destruction was there, people built on it, and then another layer destruction and another. So when you dig in here, you dig, let's say you dig a shaft, and you have a sample of dirt, and somewhere you find there's a burnt area. It's burned, it's black, and then that's a layer of destruction. And also when you destroy it, you have all kinds of things in there, and what is most helpful is the pottery. Okay, potteries are ancient women's fashion statements. Okay, and they have different kind of shapes, and people can say that whatever shape it is, and people can trace the development of these shapes of the potteries, and they can give about 50 years. There's a complete change of a style, and by that they can have they have a relative date. Of these layers of destructions. Okay, and if that can correspond with history, there's a certain war, and then you can say this roughly belongs to what. But it's a sequence that and you have to match the whole thing correctly. If you if you match it wrong, the whole series could be matched wrong. Okay, so the relative dates are indisputable. The lower one must be earlier than the higher one. Okay, however. How do you find its absolute dates? Which year did this war happen that caused this layer of destruction? And that's when you have to find out some markers with history. Okay? And the absolute date of archaeology is using inscriptions. The best thing is you find the inscriptions. Inscription. If, especially when you have a seal and that has a name, something on it, and you know which king it is, and then you can trace it to a certain civilization that has already a chronology or history, and then you can date this archaeological finding. Now, usually it's from the advanced chronology, from the advanced civilizations. And, like, say, Palestine, or we should say, the land of Israel, okay? All right. In there, where did it come from? Well, in the east, it has Mesopotamia. And in the west, it has Egypt. Okay. So that's how you get the ancient civilizations from there. If you find some artifacts that are from these two places, especially inscriptions, and then you can date it. Okay, and in Mesopotamia, the dates are based on Mesopotamian dates are based on an archaeological finding well, it's pretty secure for the first millennium, but for the second millennium, it's based on an archaeological finding of what do you call the Venus tablet of Armi-Tzadduka. Armi-Tzadduka is one of the last kings of the first dynasty of Babylon, and he recorded the motion of Venus, its appearance, and it's an archaeological, it's an astronomical event, and today we can use science to get the exact pattern, and by matching with the data, because the data was not so accurate. Sometimes it's erroneous, but find statistically what's the best match. You can have the a estimate of its date, the so-called Venus tablets, okay, of Armi-Tzadduka. And then you have the high, the middle, and the low, three possibilities. And most people, for safety's sake, take the middle possibility. I personally prefer the high because it makes Hammurabi match with the Abraham. Because Abraham fought with four kings from the east. One of them was named Amraphel, which basically is Hammurabi, is another spelling. And but anyway, the Mesopotamian date was generally pretty reliable because of this astronomical dependence. And the Egyptian, however, is people say had another astronomical theory. It's called Sothic dating, Sothic cycle. It is proposed that the ancient Egyptians used a civil calendar of 365 days, which is a quarter day shorter than the roughly the tropical year, 365.25. Actually, it's 0.2422. Okay, and if your civil calendar is quarter day shorter, 4 years later, you're going to be 1 day short. Okay, and how about 365 of the cycle data? You're going to be 1 year short. Okay, and it will have a cycle. So this is a Sothic cycle theory, and if this is correct, it's going to provide a long period. About over 4 times 365. That will be cycling. But did the ancient Egyptians keep accurate astronomical observations that long for over thousands of years? That is a question. And it is also a fact that the ancient Egyptians changed their calendar several times. They used solar calendar, lunar calendar, and the civil calendar, and they have changed these. And there's no guarantee that this is correct. So the Egyptian calendar has 2 assumptions. Okay, the absolute date of archaeology is based on ancient civilizations, and mostly because the Mesopotamian does not go over the 2nd millennium, they depended on what? It depended on Egypt, Egyptian chronology. But Egyptian chronology has a problem. Its problem is that it depends on this Sothic date theory. This is questionable, and most likely it is wrong. And we found out many mismatches. And it's also based on the assumption of linear dynasties. We know from China, there are times that China had 16 dynasties parallel. But if you make them all linear, you make Chinese history much longer. But since we know better, because China has better history, and we know it's parallel. But for Egypt, they assume it's all linear, and that is the problem. That's why Egyptian chronology is longer than the rest of the world, and it just does not match. So what do we get? That the absolute dates of archaeology is dependent on Egyptian chronology, which itself depends on a Sothic date theory, and which itself has been proven wrong. So what do we get? We get that the so-called archaeological time scale, it is based on assumptions. All right. Okay. It's not based on incontrovertible facts. Okay. Since based on assumptions, then is it necessary for us to believe it, trust it, memorize its dates, and as if it's a biblical reliability? No, it is not, right? So I know that there are a lot of Christians who believe in the oneness of truth, and they try to be academic. They try to be accepted by the academic world, and it seems to be possible, to merge with the secular archaeology. but it really is not. Okay, I know many people of good heart trying to be accepted, merge into that society, and based on that knowledge we value the Bible, and therefore they tend to make this the time between the flood and Babel to be much longer than biblical data allows. So I understand that desire, and it is within the ranks, not only Christians, but many within the young earth creationists, and who believe that the astronomical time scale is invalid, and the geological time scale is invalid. However, many do believe in the archaeological time scale. I'm just trying to say that if we want to be intellectually honest and thorough, let's question that concept's foundation too. And let's make things, and all the theories tentative at least, that they're not solid. Okay? The only thing solid is the Bible. Okay? All the secular theories are based on assumptions, and we need to recognize their nature so that we will not be brought down if it's wrong. Okay? So I'm not rejecting these brothers and sisters, and some of them are agreeing with me in young earth creationism. I'm just saying that we need to be honest and thorough, and give honest question to this concept, and recognize its nature. It is also based on assumptions. Okay, and therefore, in the biblical chronology, there are two genealogies in Genesis. One is in Genesis 5, one is in Genesis 11. Okay, the one in Genesis 5 gives us a date from creation to the flood. Okay, and in Genesis 11 gives us a date from basically the flood to the Tower of Babel, to Abraham, who is a contemporary of the Tower of Babel. Okay, and a lot of Christians believe that the first in Genesis 5 was a chronogenealogy. It gives the time. The one in Genesis 11 is not. But on the surface, they are all genealogies. They gave us the dates. Okay, at certain age, A gave birth to B, and after that, A lived in certain years, and then he died. Okay, so they are all chronogenealogies, and I think that is an honest estimate. Let's not reject the one in Genesis 11. Okay, as a chronogenealogy. Okay, and therefore there is really only a short time between the flood and the Babel, and not a very long time. Each nation tends to extend its own history longer so that it can be more proud than other nations. It can be prouder than other nations, right? That's human nature. So when we evaluate each nation's history, we need to cross-reference and check, and do not be deceived by human pride. And ultimately, the only reliable source is the Scripture, right? Amen.